Testing, testing. Namo Sadanto, sorry. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One. Namo Sadanto Sujedoye Alahadi Samyao Samputoje. Wu Sang Sen Sen Wei Miao Fa, Bai Qian Wan Jie Nan Zhao Yu. 我今见闻得受持，愿解如来。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I vow to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Today is February 8th, 2014. We're here in Berkeley, California. And we're about to start the lecture on the Avatamsaka Sutra. What I would first like to invite everyone to do is to turn to the front of their sutra text, and we'll recite the name of the sutra and the assembly of bodhisattvas that are associated with the sutra on the bottom. The pronunciations on the bottom. Also, if people need a chair, feel free to get a chair if you need a chair. You need a chair? Okay. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Ai Wei Fo Bu Sai.
Everyone, welcome again to Berkeley Monastery for tonight's Saturday night lecture on the Avatamsaka Sutra. So the 9th day of the Chinese New Year, is that right? And with the Chinese New Year rain has been coming, which is very welcome. So if everyone is ready, we put our palms together and we recite the text on page 51. It's the last page on the book. So we'll begin with the Chinese and we'll start from right at the top.
Okay. 佛子譬如真经，一测取魔营， 转更明净，此地菩萨，所有善根，亦复如是，以方便慧，思维观察，转更明净。佛子菩萨住持南圣地，以方便智，成就功德，下地善根，所不能积。
We'll now read in English together on page 51. Disciples of the Buddha, this is just as true gold, when polished with Musara Galwa, becomes even brighter and more pure. All of good roots of the Bodhisattva on this ground are just the same way. Through his use of wisdom of expedience to reflect and contemplate, they become ever brighter and more pure. Disciples of the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva dwells upon this ground of difficult conquest, the merit and virtue he accomplishes through wisdom of expedience cannot be met. They could. Do you want a few minutes? Do you want a few minutes before we begin? We might potentially have more people online than in the room with us today, so. You have any story to share?
A story to share? Well.
So I just have something to say about it being the Chinese New Year. The first of Chinese, or rather the eve of the Chinese New Year, is when most Asian families who celebrate the Lunar New Year gather together. And if you read the news reports about China, it's called a mass migration, where everyone goes back to their hometowns. And then on the 15th day is the conclusion of the celebrations of the New Year. So the New Year celebrations last for 15 days. And on the 15th day for many Chinese is also just as significant as the eve for the first day itself. So since we're waiting for things to come online, tomorrow the RBA will be having a event at the Auckland Chinese Museum. Is that right? Auckland, or just Auckland Museum? Okay, just Auckland Museum. We have our boys from our boys' school at City of 10,000 Buddhas in Ukiah, and they'll be performing a lion dance, which I am told is very impressive, and also a, how would you call it, a classical Chinese orchestra. And our community is also making Vietnamese spring rolls. So make sure that you are there. It begins at 11:30 and up to 4 o'clock. And I believe there's an admission fee of maybe for student and children $10. Is that right? 12 p.m. Admission fee $10. Okay, all right. I guess we'll just start, Jerry. That every bodhisattva practice from the first ground to the fifth ground. And then because we are nearing the end of the fifth ground right now, and we can see, as we go around the text, we can also see what the Bodhisattva was cultivating on the first ground. In fact, if you were to turn to page 49, which we covered last week, if you look at the second last paragraph, it says, furthermore, within all Buddha's dharmas, he or she comes to live the home life, and having left the home life, hears Dharma even more, attains Dharani, and becomes a hearing and maintaining Dharma master. Basically, what this passage means at this point in the text is that this summarizes the Bodhisattva's method of practice, which is he lives the home life and he gets immersed into the Dharma. He's surrounded by the Dharma 24/7, and then he can practice the Dharma and attain Dharani the whole time. So, but he started on the first ground. So throughout the first ground, the Bodhisattva, he started by making offerings to Buddhas. And from making offerings to Buddhas, he cultivated the Dharmas by purifying his habitual ways of thinking to become more bright and pure. So his nature became more subdued and more compliant. In other words, you could say that if he was stubborn, he was a lot less stubborn, or all that had melted away. And then on the second ground, which is the ground of living filth, the first ground was the ground of happiness. Second ground, the ground of living filth, he cultivated and he left habits such as stinginess, jealousy, and he maintained the precepts really well. In fact, in this ground, he specializes in the paramita of the precepts. In every ground, from the first to the 10 grounds, every ground corresponds to a particular paramita that a bodhisattva cultivates. So the first ground, he cultivated giving. On this fifth ground that we are now on, he actually cultivates dhyana. So before he came here, on the second ground, he cultivated precepts. At the third ground, he cultivated the emptiness of all the impermanence of all dharmas. So when he did this, he was successful in breaking the bonds of use. He broke the bonds of desire, the bonds of form, the bonds of existence. And he cultivated the paramita of patience because he had to do this through meditation. And on the fourth ground, on the ground of blazing wisdom, he also left the home life, interestingly, on the fourth and fifth ground. And he cultivated a very deep mind of faith and understanding. And the corresponding paramita on the fourth ground was a paramita of vigor. So another reason why we use the sutra uses gold as an analogy. If anyone has ever owned any gold jewelry, gold doesn't tarnish. It doesn't oxidize if you leave it out. So if you have a necklace or a gold watch, you put it in a drawer. If you come back 10 years later, it will still shine as brightly as the day you put it in, or as the first day it was made. We have a lot of things on our altar table that kind of looks like gold. We have it made from bronze. And in preparation for the Chinese New Year, just last week we had a lot of committee members come over to polish. Because unlike gold, normal metal like iron rusts. If you leave it out, especially in this weather, it will rust. We have the things that you see on top, most of them are made of bronze. And over time, just like most other metals, they oxidize. But because we use gold to symbolize purity, gold is an excellent metaphor, because true gold it just stays true gold. The surface doesn't change no matter what you expose it to.
And just to add another comment about gold, oftentimes an analogy for our cultivation, because when we talk about gold and you talk about the process of, you could say, smelting it, refining it. So often during the meditation process, you can feel the heat of the body. You can feel the heat of trying to change our afflictions or our you could say confusions. And so the process of cultivation is actually like a purification. So but when you get pure, which is here is true gold, then you're completely pure. And so at this point, the Bodhisattva, with this analogy, he's completely pure, and now he's shining it. He's making it shine. So it's at a point where he's got the goal to be pure. So he's, in our analogy, we've purified our physical, and then now he's shining it to make it shine.
Actually, it's very interesting. From the first ground to the 10th ground, at this point in the text, the Buddha always mentions about gold in reference to the Bodhisattva developing his or her good roots. And every time the goal is mentioned, it's slightly different. So on the grounds before this, first it was mentioned that the gold had to be smelted to get purified, more and more purified. On the fourth ground, if you look back, it says that the gold has then been worked at by a master goldsmith into an intricate jewel embedded with gems. And at this stage, at the fifth ground, it says here that the gold is actually polished to reveal its brilliance. And as we go on, the 6, 7, 8 stages, it ends with the gold as a king's crown. That's the ultimate that I guess gold could be. Yeah.
So I think another element to that is in Buddhist sutras, what you often find is a lot of analogies. And in terms of when you read them, you'll find that the analogies are trying to teach teach to us in our direct experience of something, so we could see something very clearly. What you find is that Buddhism in our sutras tends not towards an abstract kind of philosophical principle, but grounded in our actual everyday experience. And so this, we can say, oh yeah, gold, and we can see that when you polish it, it becomes brighter. So that's an analogy here for our good roots in the Dharma. And what's polishing it is the wisdom of expedience. And so good roots is often a term we hear a lot in Buddhism. Sometimes it's been translated as foundation in the Dharma, if you want to move it to a much more, you say a clear translation. Some people try to translate foundation in the Dharma, because they say, well, in the West, good roots doesn't quite make sense. It's not something we have. And they say maybe it makes sense for a culture that plants rice. I think they plant rice for roots. I mean, the rice, they plant roots. But in the West, we often don't talk about this person has a lot of good roots in our everyday language. So in Chinese, they say it a lot when you go to the temple. It says, 你有善根, 善根. That's literally translated as good roots.
In the sutras, roots are also used in the form of a tree. So a tree is only as strong as its roots. We have grapevines. We have about 10 acres of grapevines at the back of the city of 10,000 Buddhas. And most grapes, you don't need to irrigate them, because they're even in harsh, dry weather, because their roots can go down as deep as, if I remember correctly, 40 to 80 feet in the ground. All you see is this little bush if you prune it. If you leave one vine unpruned, it can cover the area of this whole Buddha hall. But if you prune it, all you see is a little tree, no taller than a man, no wider than the arms. But the roots amazingly go down 80 feet just to get water. So that's why grapes grow really well in dry regions. And if you look at a huge tree, what you don't see are the network of roots that actually hold it down. If you ever witness any car accident that hits a tree, the tree stays solid and the car is, depending on the speed, has no match for how solid the tree is. And that's all because of the roots. So good roots is used, and also fruits. When a person attains arahatship, they use the term fruit as in the result of your cultivation. So there's a lot of analogies that go back to the tree. It starts with the roots, and then you end up with the fruit, which is the result. Yeah.
So the other element of this, I would say, is the wisdom of expedience. That's another kind of Buddhist jargon, you could say. And what does that mean exactly? It would mean that this bodhisattva is skillful in using the teachings to teach living beings and to understand what is going on. So we learned about bodhisattva in previous lectures, but that he mastered, if you look at page 47, he mastered many various skills, ranging from the most esoteric would be exorcism, and to more mundane things that we see every day, which are hymns, songs, dance, architecture, planning, all the things that we would say in the world are the skills that we respect and give credence to. And so the bodhisattva actually learns them all and is a master in them. And so here his wisdom is able to use those expedient skills, you can say those kind of worldly skills, and teach in a way that connects the living beings. As last week Dharma Master Ying mentioned, this bodhisattva on this ground has done something very difficult. That's what's called difficult conquest. Is he's been able to combine both transcendental wisdom and worldly wisdom and make them non-dual. So his understanding of the world and all the skills of the world and the transcending Buddha Dharma, for him, they're not two separate things. Or for, as ordinary living beings looking at it, oftentimes we can divide them and see them as two separate things. So here he's basically using these expedients to transform and polish his good roots. And good roots, so there's lots of ways to cultivate good roots. So in all the previous grounds, each time they said he practiced a certain way, and therefore, for instance, in the fourth ground, he cultivated faith and understanding, and that, polished his good roots or helped his good roots grow. So in each ground, he does something specifically, like holding precepts, etc., and that basically plants the good roots so that he will be able to progress in his cultivation. And so we say it a lot because for us, it's the foundation in your practice, and we need to have good roots to be able to basically have some solidity in our practice. Okay. So the next section, disciples of the Buddha, when the Bodhisattva dwells upon this ground of difficult conquest, the merit and virtue he accomplishes through the wisdom of expedience cannot be matched by the good roots of the ground below. As mentioned, this is the fifth ground, the ground of difficult conquest, and she is accomplishing merit and virtue. So that's another term that we've tried to translate in many ways. Merit, and sometimes in Sanskrit, I believe or Pali is punya, and so it's merit and virtue. But in Chinese, we translate this as fu bao, and gongda, and it's oftentimes separated as something that's external and something that's internal. So basically, when we cultivate merit, we might be doing good things for the temple. Helping. For us, last week we helped clean the Buddha hall, various activities, cooking, etc., making offerings. So that creates a lot of merit. And virtue is often a sense of something internal. We're cultivating a quality in our heart and our minds. And so through meditation, through patience, through developing compassion, that's kind of the virtue, something internal. So that's one way that merit and virtue has been explained, that we're cultivating this external goodness and as well as an internal goodness. And though he here is able to accomplish all this through, again, the wisdom of expedience, and he's not known, and no one below his stage or this ground knows what he knows. And I think that's oftentimes Venerable Master would just say, that's like, a kindergartner doesn't know what a college student thinks or what a college student knows. And I think for us, it's, you could say, a bit, humbling, I guess. I'm not sure what the right word is. It's basically, we at least we should stay humble, because we really don't know what the Bodhisattva stages are. We can read it here, but since we actually have not had that experience, and we haven't had that realization, we don't know what they really are like. Well, we can be inspired and kind of draw near it. So that's for that particular passage. Okay.
Now we'll move on to the next one. This is where it gets a bit interesting.
Yeah, we got some cosmology going on.
Buddhist cosmology.
So we could read the Chinese together.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. 佛子如日月行修，供电光明，风力所持，不可致害，亦非于风所能轻动。此地菩萨所有善根，亦复如是，以方便自随诸观察，不 不可执坏，以非一切声闻独觉世间善根所能情动。此菩萨使波罗蜜中禅波罗蜜偏多，与非不修，单随离岁分。
We'll now read in English. Disciples of the Buddha, this is just as the light from the mansions of the sun, moon, stars, and planets, since they are upheld by the wheel of wind, cannot be destroyed, and cannot be shaken by any other wind. The good roots of the Bodhisattva on this ground are just that way, since he uses wisdom of expedience to contemplate in accord, they cannot be destroyed, and no sound hearer or sage enlightened by conditions or worldly good roots can move it. I'll read it again. Disciples of the Buddha, this is just as the light from the mansions of the sun, moon, stars, and planets, since they are upheld by the wheel of wind, cannot be destroyed, and cannot be shaken by any other wind. Does anyone have any idea what it means? Mansions of the sun, moon, stars, upheld by the wheel of wind? And want to give a try? Okay. We in the Saha world belong to a world system that is structured. We have a mountain called Mount Sumeru, and every world system is a duplicate of the world system that we are in. It has a Mount Sumeru, it has the sun, the moon, the heavens, the stars. It has 4 continents, and we have seas and a ring of 7 iron mountains circling this world system. And this whole world system is supported by a disk of earth. Some texts actually refer to this earth as gold, going back to the analogy of gold. The gold or the earth is really solid to support this whole world system. The earth is in turn supported by water, by a disk of water or wheel of water, which is in turn supported by a wheel of fire. And finally at the base, the largest wheel of it all is called the wheel of wind. And this is what this text is referring to. Our world system is supported right at the base by a wheel of wind. So what exactly is this wheel of wind? We would probably call it gravitational forces now. So every mass in our world system, every planet, the sun, the moon, they all, they have gravitational forces. So basically, this world, this wind wheel is the force of gravity that keeps all the planets in check, revolving around one another. We all revolve around the sun, the moon revolves around the earth, and it keeps it in balance. And why does it say that it cannot be destroyed and cannot be shaken by any other wind? Well, the reason why it's shaped like a wheel is that our gravitational forces, if you shoot like the satellites, they go into space and then they go into orbit. So they circle. So it's like a wheel. If you look at the rings of Saturn, it's really, really obvious that they all come together because of their own individual small bodies of mass. They attract one another and form like a wheel. So that's the analogy used for saying that the wheel of wind, which is in fact the gravitational forces. And it's interesting that the Rambo Master, when he explained this, he says you can't see it, which is true. You can't see it, just like something like magnetic force you can see. He says, but unless you've opened the 5 eyes through cultivation, then you can actually see the forces of gravity of each heavenly body. And I think one way to imagine that is, when I was young, I used to play with magnets, and they sell you science kits where they have iron fillings. So you put a magnet at the bottom of a paper, and then you throw the iron, you sprinkle the iron fillings, and then you move the magnet around, and then you can see the magnetic fields which the iron fillings gravitate to. So Ram Master says you can't see the forces, the gravitational forces with just normal eyes. But if you open your 5 eyes, apparently you can see it all. And you can see all the forces holding everything together. And he goes on to actually say, explains the source of the power. He says the source of the power is derived from the spiritual power of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. But not just that. It also comes from the power of our pure and default karma. All living beings, karma, have a reason, contributes towards this force of gravity. And he also says an ordinary person cannot begin to comprehend this kind of power, and it's true, I can't. And that's why it's not really made known to people. If you want to know more about this, is explained in great detail on the 5th chapter of the Avatamsaka, which we are right now on chapter 29, 39?
I think it's 26.
26, but if you go back to our publication, the 5th chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra explains that in detail. And if you want more as to how the wind actually comes from, this wheel of wind, I would suggest reading the Shurangama Sutra, where the Buddha explains in detail how the wind arises from a mixture of adding of movement from the fundamental brightness. Yep.
So here we see that the analogy is that the wheel of wind cannot be shaken. It cannot be moved by any other wind. So if I were to think about that, you can think about, well, gravity can't really be shaken by wind. It's an interesting kind of concept. I think I did study physics in college, but I have to studied it quite a while ago, so I'm not sure if all my physics facts are straight. But gravity is actually a very strange force, because we can't get it to combine with all the other forces. So the physics was always looking for this unified theory of everything, and the gravitational force doesn't quite seem to fit into our general theory. So it's an interesting force that we have. So the Bodhisattva, though, on the next section, talks about the good roots of the Bodhisattva on this ground are just in that way. So they cannot be shaken. Because he has the wisdom of expedience, then they cannot be destroyed, and no sound here, sage, or a Parcheka Buddha or worldly good roots can move it. So here, I want to tell a story, which is basically the idea of not being moved when, because what I would say, wisdom of experience, what can move somebody who, say, doesn't have mastery in a subject area? Well, somebody comes, let's say, with a philosophical...
Can you define move?
Move, okay.
Move someone?
So move, I would say, is your mind. You can see it in your own heart. Is when your mind is when you are attracted to something. Your mind moves. You can say influence, yeah, influence. It's basically you see something and your mind moves out with a thought of desire, so it moves, or it moves out with a sense of intimidation. Or on a grosser level, it would say, we had no foundation in our argument, and so we aren't able to stand on it, and it gets turned over. And so this story is actually about Shariputra's uncle. And so and the story goes that when Shariputra was still in his mother's stomach, so Shariputra, his mother's name was Shari, and Putra means son, so, or maybe it means I think son, yeah, son, and so it's Shari's son, and so Shariputra. So when he was in his mother's stomach, his mother would get into arguments with his uncle, and his uncle was, I would say, very intelligent, a very good debater, and before he could always out-talk his sister, but for some reason, after she got pregnant, he couldn't do it anymore. So he thought, wow, this son that's going to come out, my nephew, is going to be probably a really intelligent boy, because once he started being in his mother's stomach, she got very intelligent. So he said, what am I going to do? I can't get outsmarted by my nephew. So he said, I'm going to go learn all the worldly knowledges. I'm going to go and master all the Vedas, the philosophies. So he went off and he went to study in great depth all the various philosophies of the world. And he got nicknamed the long-nailed Brahmin, because the Venerable Master explained the story. He said he was studied so hard, and he made a Master as a side comment, unlike you guys who don't really start that hard in the Buddha Dharma. But he said this person studied really hard all the Vedas, the philosophies, that he never even had time to cut his nails. He would just sit there and study, and try to really. And so finally, he's mastered all this knowledge, and he came back to see his nephew, and he's gonna win a debate with his nephew. So he comes to see his sister, and he says
after 8 years, right?
after a while, and he comes back, and so he talks to his sister, and his sister says, "Oh, your nephew's already left to leave home with the Buddha." He says, "What? He left home with a Buddha? How? Who is this Buddha who has who can take my nephew away?" So he goes and basically says, "I'm going to get my nephew back." So he's going to go and debate the Buddha. So he goes to the Buddha and he says, "Okay, if I win this debate, you have to give me back my nephew, Shariputra. And if you win, I'll cut off my head and give you my head." So in India, I guess they're really serious about debating. Actually, it's very true. If you read some of the Buddhist texts, they actually are really serious about debating. If you lose a debate, you actually convert to their religion, or you do something pretty drastic. So he makes that that kind of he puts that premise down, or puts that he throws the gamut, or you throw the on the ground, and so the Buddha says, "Okay, so what argument do you want to put forward?" And he says, "Okay, I take not accepting anything as my position." Okay, so the Buddha says, "Okay, so you take not accepting as your position." That's right. I take not accepting anything as my position. He says,
"You have to explain."
What?
So he thought that by putting forth this theory, he was really, really smart, because he could just deny everything the Buddha said and he would always win. So that's why he came up with this theory of not accepting
Not accepting anything.
Yeah.
So then the Buddha looks at him and says, "Okay, do you accept your own theory?" And he looked at the Buddha. He thought, "Uh-oh, if I say I don't accept my theory, then I don't have anything to stand on. But if I say accept my theory, I'm in a contradiction." And so he looks at the Buddha, and he turns around and starts running away. And so in the story, Venerable Master says he runs 4 miles away, and then he thinks to himself, "You know what? I'm a grown man. I made a bet, and I should hold up to my side of the deal." So he goes back to the Buddha and says, "Okay, I have to give you my head, because that's what I promised, and I lost the debate." And the Buddha says, "Okay, that's fine. You don't have to cut off your head." He's already had a knife ready. He says, "You don't have to cut off your head. Actually, it would be really much better if you actually cultivated and became a monk as well." So Shariputra's uncle also left home and became a monk under the Buddha. So this is a story of how you can see the Buddha was unshaken. Although somebody comes with who has great philosophy and maybe great understanding, and is basically in a contest, he's unmoved, because the Buddha has a solidity that goes beyond just worldly knowledge.
At this point, I just wanted to say that when my mom was pregnant with me, the only thing that happened was that she had a craving I'm Malaysian, so she had a craving for durian, which is the king of fruits. And to some people, they can't stomach it. But that's the only thing that happened when my mom was pregnant with me.
Yeah, so I think in terms of applying it for ourselves, excuse me, it's in terms of our modern society, I think there's a lot of things that can pull our hearts or our minds into something. I would say there's a lot of philosophies out there, such as you could say like scientism, capitalism, consumerism, a lot of isms that when they're brought forward kind of move our minds into some space, especially actually in advertising and marketing. That's kind of what they're supposed to do, is try to move our hearts, move us into a sense of fear or a feeling of lack or a sense of desire. And so the way to not get moved by it is to understand the Buddha Dharma. And I think it's actually the wisdom of expedience for this bodhisattva is actually deeper than just mastery of the worldly knowledges and skills. So it's actually because he goes back down to the root. He goes back down to the root of the mind and doesn't then get moved by the external phenomena. So so one element, by being a master in everything, then as those things come, he knows how to respond and teach in accordance with whatever that living being's affinities are. So somebody who's, say, really intelligent, like the Buddha, in the Buddha's case, who's really good at philosophy and debate, the Buddha can respond with philosophy and debate to teach that living being. If the living being might be an artist, he could be able to teach with artistic skills. But his heart of unmovingness doesn't come from you could say a knowledge that's based on a conscious sixth consciousness, if you know that terminology, a kind of conscious deliberation, but because it goes to the source of his mind. It's something much deeper, and that's not moving. It's not him trying to calculate how as ordinary living beings we do. We calculate, and try to find a principle in our minds to then bring forward. They're coming from a much deeper stillness that's not moving.
Also because the bodhisattva has mastered all worldly skills, he also sees, as what Jin Chuan Shi just said, he sees that all these worldly skills originate from a person's mind. So it is not absolute and is always changing. For example, mathematical theories is always changing. People are always coming up with new theories. Physics, there's always something new as the instruments or measurements get more and more, more precise, or as measuring devices can capture new data that the old ones can't. If you look at how we have evolved in terms of economics, in terms of our business sense, in terms of science and technology from the last 50 years, we have made great leaps because we have invented new ways of seeing things, or we just get smarter. But the Bodhisattva understands that this all comes only from the mind, from a mundane mind, from people's minds. And no matter how smart or intelligent it is always evolving. There's no constant. Whereas the Buddha's wisdom, which is what he relies on, when he understands, when he masters all this worldly wisdom, goes right to the root of all the problems of the human condition. So he sees the difference between something that is always staying constant and something worldly good roots that's always evolving and never staying and always changing depending on the conditions that change.
So actually that's a good point, which is what worldly good roots are. There would be good roots that are planted in the conditioned world. In the world. So for instance, doing good but with some sense of wanting something back. That would be a kind of a worldly good root. So what the Bodhisattva is trying to cultivate is a transcendent good root. Okay. So we can also, the next part is about the 10 paramitas. So the Bodhisattva, among the 10 paramitas, stresses the paramita of dhyana. Okay, so the 10 paramitas, I think people who have been going through the sutra with us, yeah. Oh, please.
What you mean by wisdom of expedience?
Okay. If I were to kind of try to explain it in through our daily experience, it's basically knowing how to teach a living being exactly through their conditions, with whatever their need, and it's something that comes like a reflection in a mirror. So it's like somebody comes, they need something, and there's no need to be deliberate. The deliberation is happening. It's just teaching immediately to the person's affinities, the person's potentials. And in this case, since he's a master in all these areas, he can teach through these methods for instance, medicine, the arts, all those various ways.
Sometimes a person needs kind words. Sometimes a person needs someone to be stern with him. And the Bodhisattva, if we followed the process of the Bodhisattva from the first ground to the fifth ground, not only has he gained the ability to understand all worldly skills like psychology, if he's with someone who's more prone to mathematics, he may use mathematics models to try to prove something to the person. But he also relies on the wisdom of the Buddha, which means that he has the ability to see your habitual ways of thinking through his own cultivation. So when he sees you, he knows where you're coming from, what you've been through, and what would work best in trying to bring you out of where you are right now. Yeah.
Actually, I think maybe a more accessible analogy would be, if you see teachers, a very good teacher has a lot of expedience in a sense that they're able to teach to many different types of students. A certain student might learn through writing, certain might have a visual way of learning, a certain student might have auditories mainly. So the teacher is able to use those ways of teaching in expedient ways to help them understand something more deeply, and also build on what he's teaching. So for instance, if he's trying to teach algebra, then he first builds with addition, and then he builds with, actually first teaches them what numbers are, then he teaches addition, and then he teaches, step by step he builds up. So he teaches appropriate to the conditions and builds to something that's much more deep.
Most parents are masters at using expedience for
hopefully
their kids.
Hopefully. So, but at the same time though, this is a wisdom. So it's not an expedient of the conscious mind. This is a wisdom that comes, as I said, beyond the conscious mind. It's something that's direct. Actually, another story I remember I was going to tell was the Venerable Master, there's a story when they say the scientist comes to meet the Venerable Master. As you hear the tapes, sometimes they go dong, and then there's a scientist comes to meet the Venerable Master. So this story goes basically, the Venerable Master, I think, was at Gold Mountain Monastery in San Francisco. And so a scientist basically comes and has a whole bunch of questions. He came from an academic conference. And basically he wants to meet the Venerable Master and wants to ask him a bunch of questions. So he gets to the Venerable Master as an Asian scientist. And he asks the Master, okay, are you enlightened? And the Venerable Master looks at him and doesn't say anything. He just looks at him, and he looks at the Venerable Master. And at some point, one of the Venerable Master's disciple comes with a cup of water for the Venerable Master. The Venerable Master takes his cane, hits the disciple on the head, and says, are you enlightened? And the looked at the Master and goes, okay. And then the Venerable Master said, and then the scientist thought that was a very scientific response. Because the scientist said, if you had said you were enlightened, I would have not believed you. But if you said you were not enlightened, I would have looked down upon you. So for you to ask your disciple that was a very scientific response. I says, okay. And then so the next question on his list was, okay, about leaving home. I don't really think that's a good idea. Because what happens if everybody left home? What would happen to our world? Everybody can become a monk or a nun. So Venerable Master goes, okay. Can you tell my disciple it just hit? Tell him to return to lay life. Just you all to return to lay life. He says, and the scientist went, I can't do that. It's his choice. He made his own choice. He says, well, all these other people in the world, I don't have any power to make them all monks and nuns. It's impossible. What you're saying is an impossibility. Why are you even bringing it up? He says, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. So in this whole process, at one point, basically, he gets actually so inspired, he goes to the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and on a drive down, he decides to become a monastic. Yeah, he goes to a monastic, and the this is actually a long story. It's actually a fun story. So he wants to be a monastic, and so he asked one of the person who's driving down with one of the disciples of the masters, can I be a monastic? I want to be a monastic. And he says, oh, you have to ask the Venerable Master for permission. He says, what? I have to ask for permission? That's unscientific. I can't just leave home. So he says, okay, you have to ask for permission. So he goes and asks the Venerable Master for permission, and basically what happens is the Venerable Master tells him, well, you can leave home, but your wife has to agree. And he goes, my wife has to agree? That's not scientific. So it goes, okay. And so he goes back and basically, I guess over time, convinces his wife that he can leave home. And so the wife comes to the monastery. Actually, the Middle Master tells him, that's because if I let you leave home, then, and your wife sees you leave home, she'll always have a hatred towards Buddhism. And I don't want to bear that karma. So that's why I can't let you just leave home without your wife. So he says, okay. So finally, his wife agrees for him to leave home. And she comes to the temple. And the Middle Master tells her, okay, you know what? If you don't want your husband to leave home, just be nice to him at home. And you know, if he says he wants something, you can give. And so his wife says, okay. And so he didn't come back to leave home. I don't think he even came back. And then the Middle Master says, that's because that he was wanting to leave home just because he was running away from his wife, who was always oppressing. So that's a fun story. So that's called expedient means, and a wisdom of expedience, and not being moved. So anyways, the Bodhisattva here is the 10 paramitas. He's perfected, or he's not perfect. He's basically practicing each of these 10 paramitas in each of the stages of the 10 grounds. So the 10 paramitas are extremely important, and we mentioned in the previous lectures when we were doing it that there's maybe something to learn every lecture in terms of a list. So if you're not familiar with the paramitas, it's a really good list to learn. I don't know if people know the 10 paramitas. If you know the first one? Anybody? Giving. Okay, so giving is the first one. How about the second one?
I went through it earlier.
It's your what? Nope, not patience. Precepts. Precepts. Ethics. Discipline. Precepts. Third one is patience. Yeah, patience. Fourth one? Yeah, vigor. Virya. Okay, and the fifth? We're on the fifth ground. Dhyana. Yeah, so you see the Bodhisattva here stresses the paramita of dhyana. So number 5 is dhyana. What's number 6? Anybody guess? Wisdom. Prajna, wisdom. Okay, here's a much less known part of the 10 of the paramitas is usually it's 6 paramitas, but here in the Avatamsaka there's 10. So do people know what the 7th paramita is? That's one of them though. Yes, skill and means. So skill and means is the 7th paramita. The 8th paramita? Any guesses? Vows. A kind of a determination. Vows is the 8th. And then the 9th? Powers, yeah. As spiritual powers is bala. So bala paramita. And then number 10. Yeah, knowledge. Jnana, in the Sanskrit, it's jnana. So that's the 10 paramitas. So if you, for sure, Nish, probably I would say try to remember the 6 paramitas. If you can remember that, which is giving, precepts, patience, vigor, dhyana or concentration, and the 6th one is wisdom or prajna. And that list comes up over and over again in both in the Mahayana and the Theravada, in many texts, you'll see that list come up, and that's a very useful list just to reflect on, because they often build on each other. Each of those virtues, if you cultivate them, they reflect one another and support one another. So, for instance, by holding precepts, we can develop wisdom, and actually, there's a whole section on wisdom. So when we have true wisdom, then we can truly hold the precepts well, because we no longer have attachment at all, but we can hold them purely. So they all inter-reflect. And the bodhisattva only becomes a bodhisattva because he's able to perfect all of them. So that's what distinguishes a bodhisattva than, say, for instance, we just read a sound here, or a sage enlightened by conditions, is that the bodhisattva makes vows to perfect all the paramitas. And so he cultivates giving to perfection. He cultivates, patience to perfection. We've heard the story of the patient immortal, where the Buddha, the previous life, a person comes and challenges the Buddha and cuts off his arms and his limbs, And the person says, "Are you angry at me?" And he says, "No, I'm not angry at you. Actually, when I become enlightened, I'll save you first." You know, his patience was to a point that he had no anger whatsoever from something actually cutting off his. So that's the paramita of patience.
I'll share a story about if you say you have patience, you better really have patience. This story involves Guan Yin, or Avalokiteshvara, which we have an altar at the back. So there was once this man who had cultivated to a certain point, and he thought that he had overcome anger, and he thought he had all the patience in the world. So very proudly he wrote a sign called "A Mind Like Ashes," and he hung it outside his home. Okay, so he wrote "A Mind Like Ashes," meaning there's no more fire, there's no more heat, so it's all burned out. It's only ashes. It's not even embers. It's beyond embers. It's ashes. So he put it outside his door, and he just sat outside his door, wanting everyone to see it. And along came an old woman. Said, "Ah, sir, what is that?" And he said, "It says a mind like ashes." I said, "Oh, okay. What do you say again?" He says, "Oh, it's a mind like ashes." I said, "Oh, can you repeat that, please? I think I've forgotten it." And he says, "Oh, a mind like ashes." And he was really, really cool. He didn't give rise to any impatience or anger. And this carried on the whole day. She came in the morning. By noontime, she was still there. And he was inside the house having his lunch. He said, "Excuse me, sir, what does your sign say?" And he was like, "A mind like ashes." And it was evening. And it still carried on. The old lady was still outside. "Excuse me, what does that say? Can you repeat that to me one more time? I have such a bad memory." And he kept on having to repeat himself the whole day. Until she asked again, "Excuse me, sir, what does that sign mean?" And came back the reply, "If I told you one, if I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. It says a mind like ashes. Can't you read?" So he lost his temper. And when he did, the old lady turned into Guan Yin and said, "It looks like you still have some embers in your ashes." And she flew away. So when you claim something, you better be ready for a test.
But on this ground, the bodhisattva is perfecting the paramita of dhyana. Actually, another meaning of paramita is not just perfection. It also means crossing over. So it's basically crossing over from one side, which is the side of confusion, to the side of awakening. And so the paramitas are basically ways of crossing over to awakening. So here the bodhisattva uses dhyana, or concentration. And you know it's important because in many Buddhist lists, dhyana is very central, or is part of the list. So basically you really can't get too far in cultivation without having some concentration. So for instance, in the 3 non-outflow studies of precepts, we say samadhi, or concentration and wisdom. We have a list of the Eightfold Path, where concentration is also included in there. It's actually in that one there's samadhi, but I'll say it's very similar. It's very close. But here the bodhisattva is able to cultivate dhyana and purify his mind to be able to let go of extraneous thought. In Buddhism, there's many types of dhyana. So oftentimes it's considered there's 4 dhyanas, and we went over that in the past. So the bodhisattva goes through and I would say masters all 4 dhyanas. And in this practice, there's a lot of descriptions of dhyanas and how to cultivate it. If you read various texts, how one cultivates dhyana basically starts with removing the things that are obstructing it, mainly the 5 desires of wealth, fame, sex, food, and sleep, or torpor, and the various things that basically, like ill will, hatred, sensual desire. So all these things, by removing those, actually one's then able to enter dhyana by then stilling the mind and focusing in one place. And that's what gives rise to wisdom. And so the important thing in this are two things. One is the importance of actually stilling our hearts and getting a place of concentration rather than scattering outwards. And at the other side is that this whole process is because it allows us to draw and develop our inherent wisdom. That's what it's about. It's not, in all the texts, it's not about cultivating dhyana for dhyana's sake. Because as they describe it, dhyana is very blissful. It's far more blissful than all the mundane pleasures of the world. It's something that's very, very that people can attach to. And so in the teachings it says you don't want to attach to them. And there's actually quite a few stories about that. There's a one classic story where they say there's a monk who cultivated to the fourth dhyana and basically thought that he's realized sagehood. And so he basically cultivates, and so after he passes away, he goes to the fourth dhyana heaven. So each of these states of concentration also correspond to a certain heaven. So he goes to the heaven. And then he lives, these very long, the heavens have very long lifespans, right? Eons. So he lives eons. And then finally, he goes through the signs of decay of the heavenly beings, and he's going to get reborn again. And he says, gosh, the Buddha Dharma is not true, because I'm a sage, and here I'm going to get reborn. And because of that, he falls because his, he actually, you say, slanders the Dharma. And because he actually did not have a real realization of sagehood, he just thought he was at some stage, but he actually just attached to some state, which is one of the dhyanas.
The dhyanas are really advanced stages of concentration. But if you look at it from a Buddhist point of view, you're still a really far way from, say, sagehood or having overcome birth and death. But someone at the fourth dhyana is able to sit in meditation and not move and go without food and drink for years, up to 9 years, at the fourth stage of the dhyana. So it is at one stage of cultivation, but it's still a long way towards developing the wisdom to end birth and death.
And there's another story that's maybe more, as a more contemporary story. People might have heard of a monk called Ajahn Mahabua. This is in the Thai forest tradition. And so his teacher was Ajahn Mun, and he wrote a biography about Ajahn Mun's life. And so there's a story, basically, he first meets his teacher, Ajahn Mun. They're both, so in the Thai forest tradition, they're like ascetic monks. They live in the forest, and they live a very disciplined, focused life based on meditation practice. And so he goes and actually Ajahn Mahabua comes with a boxer. He's a boxer background, so he kind of has a fighting nature. And so he talks with Ajahn Mun, and he gets instruction on meditation, and he goes and applies it. And basically, he's a very good meditator. So he gets into the formless concentrations, which are actually the four dhyanas, but even past that, there's these formless realms that are supposed to be super blissful. So he thinks, oh, I'm making some real great progress in my meditation. He goes back to Ajahn Mun and he describes, the practices and how it's going. And Ajahn Mun goes, okay, it's good. But, that's actually for you just to go to those stages isn't that useful. You just get just enough concentration so you could really try to develop wisdom. And he says, no. I really think that I need to cultivate this formless concentration. And this kind of, and so there's no, you should, and so they actually, when people report, it actually was a pretty heated argument of some sort. He actually really tried to convince Ajahn Mun that no, really, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, is cultivating this concentration. And so then he goes back, and he tries to meditate again, and probably because in his mind he has probably a respect for Ajahn Mun, but at the same time, so his mind's not quite as still. He can't get back into that state. And so I heard the story listening to Ajahn Amro's talk, and so he said, actually, Ajahn Mun had a thought, if it wasn't Ajahn Mun, I would have killed that person from taking that away from me. It but then later he basically cultivated and he realized that he needed to cultivate at a different place. And so just saying that the mind can easily try to attach to something, and with good teachers, they try to get us to unattach. It's not something we want to do. So here the Bodhisattva though basically is perfecting dhyana and is able to basically enter it, as he wishes. But it says here, it's not that he fails to practice the other dhyanas, but he only does so according to his ability, his power and proportionality.
The other paramitas.
Yeah, the other paramitas. So the other 9 that I mentioned, the one like giving, precepts, patience, etc. Okay. So we want to do. We can do the last little. Oh, you have something to story? Okay, I'll just read the last. So we can just finish this before we call it an evening. So we can read the Chinese. 佛子是名略说菩萨摩诃萨第五难生地，菩萨住此地，多作多衰托天王，与诸众生所自在. Okay, we'll stop there because that's only how much English we have. We're going to need some more text next time. So in the English, disciples of the Buddha, this is called a general discussion of the Bodhisattva Mahasattva's 5th ground of difficult conquest. The Bodhisattva who dwells upon this ground usually becomes king of the Tushita heaven, and towards all living beings acts with comfort and ease.
So for those who like to have lists, the Bodhisattva on the first ground, okay, this is fifth. When he's on the 5th ground, he's usually a king of the Tushita heavens. But on the first ground, he's said to be a king of Jambudvipa. Usually, not always, but usually a king of Jambudvipa. On the 2nd ground, he is called a wheel-turning sage king, meaning he's able to unite the whole world. Wheel-turning sage king, which is incidentally what the Buddha would have been if he had not decided to become a ascetic. And then a Bodhisattva on the 3rd ground is usually a ruler of the heaven of 33. Do you have any stories? Okay. Shakya. The Shakya, yeah, and Chakra. And a Bodhisattva on the 4th ground is usually a king of the Suyama heavens. So if you like this.
And then the Tushita heaven, as I think people should be quite familiar with that one, because that's the one that the Buddha stays in before he becomes a Buddha. So for instance, Maitreya Bodhisattva is currently in the Tushita heaven. They say there's an inner court and an outer court. So in the inner court, Maitreya Bodhisattva is right now teaching the Dharma, basically getting ready to come into this world, enter a womb, and become a Buddha. And so that's going to be in many, probably millions of years in the future. Maitreya Bodhisattva will come and teach. And so the Tushita heaven is where this Bodhisattva would dwell. And so he says, and towards all living beings act with comfort and ease, which is, we have the word 自在. 自在. So is there any questions? We have maybe just a couple minutes. We actually have a treat tonight because we got mailed the videos from Edward Berger, I believe. Edward Berger? Yeah. Who is the film producer of Amongst White Clouds, and we showed a clip where we actually showed the whole movie of the movie Vows, which documented an ordination of monks in China, one of the Chinese monasteries. I think it was a Bailingsi. It was Bailingsi. So yeah, so basically this one is another movie he's made. So he's made some short films, and this one's called Alms. So it's actually going for all, or I don't think they're actually going out for alms, but it's what the you could say eating the food in a Chan monastery, how that is integrated within the whole lifestyle of a Chan, a meditating monk. And so what we have is a short movie, maybe 25 minutes. And from our previous experience with watching this movie, these are very well done and give us a kind of a glimpse into the life of what it's like in China. And into the towards the Dharma there. So, I believe we can't broadcast or videotape it because this is something that is copyrighted. So we probably want to turn off the video for our online. But if people have a question online, for sure now you can ask your question before you disappear. We will have to stop broadcasting in a couple minutes. Any sutra describe the Tushita heaven? Well, if I don't. Oh, what is it called? I'll give him a mic.
So I said I actually have translated a text which is exactly that, describes the Tushita heaven. I don't remember the Chinese title exactly, but it's something like the sutra on the contemplation of the Bodhisattva Maitreya's ascent to the Tushita heaven.
Yeah, goes to the Tushita heaven. Great.
I can send it to you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions online? Anything? No. Okay. Actually, maybe we'll do transfer of merit since the people are online are gonna leave. Yeah. Let's transfer, and then we can sit back and I don't say enjoy the movie. We could be inspired by the movie. Yeah. Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise.